The quiet arrival. The evening sky above New York City was painted in soft shades of orange and purple. On the busy streets of Manhattan, a luxury restaurant named the Golden Vine glowed with its warm lights. This place was famous for its rare wines, elegant food, and for being a gathering point of rich business people, celebrities, and politicians. Every table was already full, with laughter and conversation filling the room. Inside, the staff moved quickly but with polished grace. Waiters in crisp black uniforms carried trays of champagne glasses. Waitresses carefully placed silver cutlery on the tables. Every detail was meant to show class. Every smile practiced to impress the wealthy guests who visited. Then, through the glass doors, a man walked in quietly. He wore a plain black jacket, faded jeans, and scuffed boots. His long hair was tied back loosely, and his face carried both kindness and a certain weight of life. It was Keanu Reeves. He didn't walk with the heavy pride many celebrities carried. He entered with the calmness of someone who had nothing to prove. But tonight, his choice of simple clothing made him almost invisible in the crowd of diamonds, silk dresses, and tailored suits. At the reception desk, a young waiter named Daniel noticed him. Daniel had joined the restaurant a few months ago. He had a sharp tongue, a habit of judging people by appearance, and a dangerous confidence that made him feel superior to anyone who didn't look wealthy. "Good evening," Keanu said softly, his voice warm but humble. "I'd like a table if that's possible." Daniel scanned him from head to toe, raising an eyebrow. The man in front of him didn't look like someone who could afford even a starter dish here. "Sir," Daniel said with a smirk, "this isn't the kind of place you just walk into. Our tables are reserved for, well, let's say people who belong." Keanu's smile didn't fade. "I understand. Perhaps you can check if there's an empty table anyway." Daniel leaned closer, lowering his voice so others wouldn't hear. "Look, this isn't a diner down the street. The cheapest thing on the menu costs more than your shoes. You'd be more comfortable somewhere else." For a moment, silence hung between them. But instead of anger, Keanu gave a small nod. "Thank you for your honesty," he said kindly. "But I'd still like to stay." Daniel rolled his eyes. "Fine, if you insist. But don't say I didn't warn you." He grabbed a menu and guided Keanu to a corner table near the window. The table was usually reserved for newcomers or guests who were not considered important. From there, Keanu had a clear view of the entire dining hall. He sat down quietly, placing his hands on the table, not bothered by the treatment. Whispers in the air. As Keanu settled, a few guests glanced at him. Some whispered among themselves. One older gentleman nudged his wife. "Isn't that?" he whispered. "No, couldn't be," she replied. "What would he be doing here dressed like that?" On the other side of the room, a young couple recognized him instantly. The woman's eyes widened. "It's Keanu Reeves," she said under her breath. "But why is he sitting all alone?" The man shook his head. "Maybe he doesn't want attention." Yet not everyone noticed. And Daniel, the waiter, had no clue who he had just spoken to. He returned with the menu and placed it on the table with a careless thud. "Here, I hope you can find something affordable." His tone was filled with hidden laughter. Keanu opened the menu slowly, scanning the items. Instead of feeling offended, he asked politely, "What would you recommend tonight?" Daniel smirked again. "Honestly? Maybe water. It's free." A couple of guests near the table overheard that remark. Their eyes narrowed, their jaws tightened, but they stayed silent, unsure if they should intervene. Keanu only smiled. "Water sounds perfect, thank you." Calm in the storm. 10 minutes passed. Daniel brought a glass of water, placing it down without looking at him. As he turned to leave, Keanu stopped him gently. "Excuse me," Keanu said. "Could you also bring me the chef's special?" "I'd like to try it." Daniel laughed under his breath. "The chef's special costs more than your jacket." "Are you sure?" "Yes," Keanu said softly, his tone calm and steady. With a dramatic sigh, Daniel wrote down the order. "Fine. Don't blame me when the bill arrives." As he walked away, a woman at the next table leaned slightly toward Keanu. "Please forgive him," she whispered. "He shouldn't talk like that." Keanu gave her a gentle smile. "It's all right. People often speak from what they see, not what they know." His words carried a quiet wisdom, and the woman felt a strange peace settle over her. The manager notices from the other side of the hall. The restaurant manager, Mr. Carter, noticed something unusual. He saw Daniel serving a guest with poor manners, and he frowned. "Why is he treating that man so rudely?" Carter muttered to himself. He walked closer, and when his eyes finally landed on the guest's face, his heart almost stopped. "Oh no," he whispered. "That's him." He froze for a moment, knowing very well who had just walked in quietly. Keanu Reeves, the man who had helped save this very restaurant from closing years ago. But before Carter could approach, Daniel returned to Keanu's table with another careless remark. "You know," he said with a smirk, "people like you don't usually last 5 minutes in a place like this. Rich folks can smell when someone doesn't belong." And with that he turned away, unaware that every word was digging a deeper hole for himself. Keanu simply looked out the window, his calm face reflecting the city lights. He didn't argue. He didn't fight. The storm of humiliation was rising, but Keanu remained calm like the ocean, silent, steady, and deep. And so, the first night in the Golden Vine began with an insult that would soon turn into a powerful lesson for everyone in the room. But the real revelation, the truth about who truly owned this restaurant, was still waiting to unfold. The deeper silence, the Golden Vine buzzed with chatter and clinking glasses. Chandeliers sparkled above the hall, but beneath their shine a quiet tension was forming around the corner table where Keanu sat. Daniel, the waiter, returned with the chef's special. The dish was placed in front of Keanu with a loud clatter, the kind meant to make people look. And they did. Guests turned their heads, some curious, some disapproving, while Daniel smirked at his little performance. "Enjoy," Daniel said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Hope it doesn't empty your wallet." Keanu looked at the food for a moment, then raised his eyes to meet Daniel's. His gaze was calm, not angry, but it was steady enough to make the waiter blink in discomfort. "Thank you," Keanu said softly, and then began eating. Daniel scoffed and walked away, muttering under his breath, "What a joke." The unseen story of the restaurant as Keanu ate quietly. Memories filled his mind. The Golden Vine wasn't just another restaurant in the city for him. Years ago, it had been a small place run by his late friend Mark, a chef with a dream. Keanu had often visited Mark during his struggling days, sharing simple meals and talking about life. When Mark fell sick and passed away, the restaurant nearly closed. But Keanu, honoring his friend's dream, had stepped in silently. He funded the renovations, partnered with new chefs, and insisted on one rule. The place must remain warm, welcoming, and respectful to all who walked in. That was the hidden truth nobody in the room knew. Not even Daniel, the arrogant waiter. Arrogance grows, Daniel returned again, this time carrying drinks for a wealthy couple seated nearby. He leaned over their table, his voice just loud enough so Keanu could hear. "You see that man in the corner?" Daniel whispered to them, pretending to joke. "He came in like he owns the place, but look at him. Doesn't belong here at all." The couple gave awkward smiles, unsure how to respond. But the woman glanced at Keanu, recognizing his face. Her expression changed, and her lips parted slightly as if she wanted to correct Daniel. But Keanu's calmness stopped her. His silence was too powerful. Still, Daniel continued, "I bet he won't even be able to pay the bill. Just wait and watch." As he laughed, other guests began to notice. Some frowned, some whispered, and a small ripple of unease spread across the hall. Kindness under fire. Keanu finished half his meal, then noticed an elderly man struggling to stand from a chair nearby. Without hesitation, Keanu stood up, walked over, and gently helped him. "Thank you, young man," the old man said, surprised by the humble stranger's kindness. "Of course," Keanu replied softly. "Take your time." Guests nearby noticed. Whispers grew louder now, not about his clothes, but about his actions. "Who is he?" someone asked. "Look at the way he treats people," another replied. Meanwhile, Daniel stood in the corner, arms folded, rolling his eyes. The manager's quiet panic from across the room. Manager Carter was sweating. He kept watching Daniel insult Keanu, and every moment felt heavier. He whispered to an assistant, "Don't you recognize him? That's Keanu Reeves. He's not just a guest. He's one of the silent owners. If Daniel keeps this up, he'll ruin us all." The assistant's face turned pale. "Should we stop him?" "Not yet," Carter said, biting his lip. "Mr. Reeves doesn't like scenes. He values respect above punishment. But if Daniel crosses the line again, I'll step in." The breaking point. After a while, Daniel returned to Keanu's table with the bill, even though the meal wasn't finished. He dropped it on the table, his smirk sharper than before. "Just to be safe," Daniel said, his voice loud enough for other guests to hear. "We like to check payment early with certain customers." Gasps rippled across nearby tables. This was no longer a private insult. It was a public humiliation. Keanu looked at the bill quietly, then lifted his eyes to Daniel. His expression didn't change. Calm, steady, patient. "Don't worry," Keanu said gently. "Everything will be taken care of." His tone carried no anger, no threat, only quiet assurance. But before Daniel could respond, another staff member hurried toward the table, her eyes wide with fear. She knew exactly who was sitting there. "Sir," she whispered to Keanu, her voice trembling, "please forgive us. This shouldn't be happening." Daniel blinked in confusion. "Forgive us, why?" "He's just—" But before he could finish, the manager himself appeared at the table, pale and sweating. "Mr. Reeves," Carter said in a voice filled with respect, "please accept my deepest apologies." A heavy silence fell over the entire restaurant. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Conversation stopped and every guest turned to stare. Mr. Reeves, the name echoed in every corner of the room. And in that single moment, Daniel's world began to crumble. The weight of truth. The golden vine had never been so quiet. The sound of cutlery on plates had faded. Even the soft music playing through the speakers seemed distant, drowned by the sudden silence that filled the restaurant. Every eye turned toward the corner table where Keanu sat. Manager Carter stood stiff, his head slightly bowed as he addressed the man so many people had underestimated. "Mr. Reeves," he said again, his voice trembling, "I cannot express how deeply sorry we are." Daniel, the waiter, froze in disbelief. His smirk disappeared, replaced by confusion. His mouth opened, but no words came out. "Wait, what?" he finally muttered, looking between the manager and the calm man at the table. "This guy? No, that can't be. He is not just anyone." Carter cut him off sharply, though his voice remained respectful when he turned back to Keanu. "Mr. Reeves has done more for this restaurant than you could imagine." Gasps rippled through the room. Several guests leaned closer to whisper, "I told you it was him. But why didn't he say anything? Look at how calm he is. Incredible." A past carved in struggle, Keanu lowered his eyes for a moment, almost uncomfortable with the attention. He had never enjoyed being placed on a pedestal. Instead, his mind drifted into memories that still lived quietly within him. Years ago, before fame and fortune, he had lived simply, sometimes even sleeping on friends' couches, sometimes on the floor. There were nights when he went without proper meals. There were days when people looked at him the same way Daniel had, as if he didn't belong. But in those hard days, he had found kindness in unexpected places, small diners where waitresses smiled even when he couldn't tip, little restaurants where chefs gave him a meal, trusting he would return the favor someday. And among those friends was Mark, the chef who had once dreamed of making the golden vine a reality. Keanu remembered the laughter they shared, the long conversations about food, life, and dreams. When Mark died, Keanu felt the world grow heavier, but he knew he couldn't let the dream die too. His voice broke through the silence of the present. "I didn't come here tonight to be recognized," Keanu said softly, his tone calm but deep, carrying weight. "I came because this place means something to me. It was built from a dream of someone who is no longer here. I only helped it continue." The waiter's disbelief, Daniel shook his head, unable to accept what he was hearing. No, this is ridiculous," he said, his voice cracking. "You're telling me this man owns this place? He came in here dressed like that, asking for water, sitting in the corner like he's nobody." A middle-aged guest near the window spoke up, his voice sharp with disapproval. "And yet he has shown more class than you did all evening." Murmurs of agreement filled the hall. Guests began nodding, whispering words like humble, kind, and true gentleman. Daniel's cheeks turned red. His arrogance was breaking apart under the weight of truth. Guests defend him, then something remarkable happened. One by one, guests began sharing small stories. A woman in a blue dress raised her hand slightly. "Years ago, I met Mr. Reeves at an airport," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "My flight was delayed and I was upset. He sat near me, talked kindly, and offered to share his food. I didn't even realize who he was until later." Another guest, an older man, spoke next. "I once saw him on the subway. No bodyguards, no attitude. He gave up his seat for a tired woman without hesitation." The story spread like sparks in a quiet forest, and soon the entire restaurant was glowing with respect. Daniel, however, was left standing alone, his earlier laughter now haunting him. The final line crossed as the room grew warmer with admiration for Keanu. Daniel's pride refused to surrender completely. He muttered bitterly, "Fine. Maybe he's famous. Maybe he helped this place. But does that really mean he belongs here tonight? Look at him. He doesn't fit the image of this restaurant." The words dropped like stones into water. A shocked gasp swept across the room. Manager Carter turned on him instantly. "Enough," he said firmly. "You forget the very soul of this place. It was never meant to be about image. It was meant to be about respect." Keanu lifted his hand gently, stopping the manager from saying more. His voice was calm, yet it carried an unshakable strength. "People often mistake appearance for worth," he said softly. "But what makes a place truly beautiful isn't gold or chandeliers or expensive food. It is how we treat each other." The hall went silent. The words hung in the air like music, sinking deep into every listener's heart. The waiters collapsed. Daniel lowered his head. For the first time that night, he felt the weight of his own actions pressing down on him. The arrogance, the insults, the way he tried to humiliate a man who had shown nothing but patience. I didn't know," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I didn't realize who you were." Keanu shook his head slowly. "You don't need to know who someone is to treat them with respect." The words struck harder than any punishment could. Daniel felt his knees weaken and he quietly stepped back, shame flooding his face. The quiet victory. The guests began clapping softly, not a loud applause, not the kind made for show, but a gentle, respectful sound that filled the room with warmth. Keanu nodded humbly and returned to his seat. He took a small sip of water as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But in truth, something had. The Golden Vine had witnessed a lesson that night. A reminder that kindness outshines pride, that respect matters more than wealth, and that humility has the power to silence arrogance. Yet, even as the tension eased, the story was not finished. Because this was only the beginning. The night in the restaurant would soon connect to another moment. A first-class flight where once again someone would underestimate Keanu Reeves and regret it deeply. When silence speaks louder than pride, the Golden Vine slowly returned to its rhythm, but the air had changed. The chandeliers still sparkled. The wine still flowed, yet something deeper now moved through the room. Guests looked at Keanu not as the quiet man in worn boots, but as someone whose presence carried a weight of truth. The waiter, Daniel, had retreated to a corner, his pride shattered, his face pale. The manager stood close by, glancing at Keanu with gratitude, silently praying that the damage wasn't beyond repair. But just when it seemed the storm had passed, another voice rose from the far side of the hall. "The voice of arrogance, all of this," the man said loudly, tapping his glass with a spoon, "is very touching. But let's not pretend kindness and humility will keep the lights on in a place like this." The hall fell quiet again. A tall man in a sharp gray suit stood up, his chest puffed out. His name was Mr. Harrison, a wealthy real estate tycoon known for his harsh words and sharper ego. He walked toward Keanu's table, his shoes clicking against the marble floor with the confidence of someone used to being heard. "Restaurants like this survive because of people like me," Harrison declared, his tone carrying across the room. "Money, power, connections, not soft smiles and little acts of charity." He stopped at Keanu's table, leaning slightly forward. "Tell me, Mr. Reeves, do you really think your gentle ways make you strong?" "No. In this world, only the ruthless rise." Keanu's silence, all eyes turned to Keanu. The room held its breath, waiting for him to answer. But instead of replying, Keanu simply looked at Harrison, his calm eyes steady, his face unreadable. The silence stretched. It grew heavier with every passing second. Harrison shifted slightly, expecting words, but none came. Finally, Keanu placed his glass of water on the table and said quietly, "Strength is not in how loud you speak, but in how deeply your silence is felt." The words were soft, almost whispered, yet they cut through the hall sharper than a blade. Stories surfaced before Harrison could respond. Another guest spoke up from the crowd. It was the elderly man Keanu had helped earlier. "Young man," he said, his voice shaky but clear. "When I struggled to stand, none of the wealthy faces here moved a finger. It was this man, this stranger, who came to me, and in that moment I felt true strength." A woman at another table nodded. "I agree. I've seen his kindness before. I once read a story about him giving away his seat on the subway. That stayed with me. Money can't buy that kind of grace." Soon more voices rose. Some guests had personal stories. Others repeated tales they'd heard in newspapers or from friends. Each one painted a picture of a man who carried himself not with wealth but with humanity. Harrison's smirk began to fade. The challenge is still. He wasn't ready to give up. He straightened his suit and leaned closer to Keanu. Words, Harrison said coldly. That's all they are. When life gets tough, when survival is at stake, kindness won't save you. Power will. Pride will. Keanu finally looked up, his eyes calm but sharp. Power without kindness, he said softly, is like a storm without rain. It makes noise, but it leaves nothing behind that grows. The room went still. The breaking of pride for the first time, Harrison felt the weight of silence pressing back against him. The guests weren't clapping or cheering, but their eyes spoke volumes. Admiration for Keanu, doubt for him. He stepped back, his face stiff, his voice losing its strength. You don't understand how the world works. Keanu's lips curved into a faint smile. Perhaps. Or maybe I simply choose to understand it differently. The atmosphere shifts as Harrison retreated to his table. The tension in the room softened. Guests whispered. Not about wealth or image anymore, but about values. Some raised their glasses in quiet respect toward Keanu. The manager approached once again, his voice low with gratitude. Mr. Reeves, tonight you have reminded us of why this place exists. It was built not for pride, but for people. Keanu nodded gently. Just make sure everyone who walks in here is treated with dignity. Whether they wear diamonds or denim, it shouldn't matter. The manager bowed slightly, his eyes wet with sincerity. The transition. Though the night ended with calm, the story was not finished. Keanu left the Golden Vine quietly just as he had entered. No grand gestures, no demand for attention. But fate had another test waiting. A test that would unfold not on the ground but high in the sky. On a first-class flight where another man's pride would clash with his humility. And once again, the truth would speak louder than arrogance. The sky becomes a mirror. After the night at the Golden Vine, Keanu slipped quietly into the cool air of Manhattan. The city's noise wrapped around him. Taxis rushing, lights flashing, voices echoing in the streets. Yet in his heart there was silence. He had not planned to make a statement or teach anyone a lesson. But life had a way of placing him in such moments. The next morning, he arrived at the airport. His destination was Los Angeles, where a new project awaited him. Like always, he traveled without fuss. No entourage, no security team, no luxury parade of attention. Just Keanu, carrying a simple black bag over his shoulder. As he passed through the airport, a few people recognized him. Some whispered. Some smiled shyly, but most were too surprised by his simplicity to even approach. He wore the same faded jeans, the same plain jacket. When the boarding call for first class echoed through the hall, Keanu walked forward quietly. Inside the cabin, the first-class cabin of the plane was filled with business people, celebrities, and those who could afford comfort in the skies. The seats were wide. Glasses of champagne sparkled on small tables, and flight attendants greeted each passenger with warm smiles. Keanu chose his seat near the window. He placed his bag under the seat, smiled at the attendant, and said, "Thank you." His voice was gentle, his tone grateful. Not long after, a tall man in a designer suit entered. His presence demanded attention. His watch gleamed, his shoes shone, and his phone never left his hand. His name was Mr. Dalton, a wealthy investor known for his arrogance. He glanced at Keanu, frowned, and then laughed under his breath. "Well," Dalton said loudly enough for others to hear, "looks like they're letting anyone in first class these days." A couple of passengers chuckled awkwardly, unsure if they should laugh. Keanu didn't respond. He only looked out the window, watching the ground crew move across the runway. The first jab Dalton leaned toward him. "Tell me, friend," he said mockingly, "did you win a lottery ticket to sit here? Or maybe the airline gave you a charity upgrade?" Keanu turned his head slowly, his calm eyes meeting Dalton's sharp ones. "No," he said simply, his voice soft. "I just bought a ticket." The answer was so plain, so unshaken that Dalton felt his smirk weaken for a moment. But pride wouldn't let him stop. "Well, enjoy it while you can," Dalton said, leaning back in his seat. "First class isn't for people who fade into the background. It's for people who run the world." Keanu gave a small nod. "Maybe. Or maybe it's for people who are just passing through, like everyone else." The words lingered in the air, light yet heavy. Whispers in the cabin. Other passengers noticed the exchange. A young woman 2 rows away whispered to her friend, "Isn't that Keanu Reeves?" The friend squinted. "No, it can't be." He wouldn't travel like this. He should be on a private jet. But a flight attendant passing by confirmed with her gentle smile. Yes, that's him. Always humble, always kind. Soon the whispers grew and more eyes turned toward Keanu. Dalton, noticing this, grew irritated. So what if he's an actor? Dalton muttered, shaking his head. Actors play pretend. I build empires. Keanu said nothing. Instead, he reached for the safety card in the seat pocket and began reading it carefully. The turbulence. The plane lifted into the sky. Smooth at first. Passengers relaxed into their seats. Meals were served, and the soft hum of engines filled the cabin. But halfway through the flight, the calm was broken. The plane shook suddenly, jolting glasses off tables. Passengers gasped. The seatbelt sign lit up and the captain's voice came over the speaker, steady but firm. Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts. The cabin rattled. Some passengers gripped their armrests. Others whispered prayers under their breath. Flight attendants moved quickly, securing trays and calming passengers. Mr. Dalton's face turned pale. He clutched his glass of champagne, which spilled onto his suit. His arrogance vanished, replaced by visible fear. What's happening? He shouted, panic breaking his voice. This plane better not crash. He looked around wildly, expecting comfort, but found none. Calm in the storm while others panicked, Keanu remained still. His breathing steady, his face calm. He reached over to help a child across the aisle fasten her seatbelt properly. It's okay, he told her softly, his voice calm as a lullaby, just like bumps on the road. Nothing to be afraid of. The girl nodded, her fear easing. Her mother mouthed a silent thank you to him. Keanu then looked toward Mr. Dalton, who was trembling. Seatbelt, Keanu said gently. Just relax. Panic won't help, Dalton snapped. Easy for you to say, but even as he barked, he fumbled to tighten his belt, following Keanu's calm instruction. The storm passes. Minutes felt like hours, but eventually, the turbulence softened. The plane steadied. Passengers exhaled in relief, some even clapping lightly as though the plane itself had triumphed. Dalton, drenched in sweat, wiped his forehead with a trembling hand. He turned to look at Keanu, who sat quietly, staring out the window again as if nothing had happened. There was no pride in him. No show of power, only peace. For the first time, Dalton felt small in the presence of someone who didn't need wealth or arrogance to command respect. The seat of regret, he leaned closer, his voice quieter now. How are you so calm? Keanu looked at him, his expression soft. Because fear doesn't change the outcome. But calm can change how we face it. Dalton swallowed hard, the words sinking into him deeper than he expected. He didn't know yet. But this moment, this calm voice in the storm, would stay with him for years. Landing with a new weight as the plane descended, the cabin slowly returned to normal. Meals were cleared. Passengers whispered about the scare, but all eyes drifted toward Keanu again, some in admiration, others in quiet awe. Dalton said nothing more, but inside something was shifting. He had mocked a man he didn't understand, and in the silence of the sky, he had discovered a truth about strength he had never seen before. But his journey of regret was not yet complete. When the flight landed, the truth about Keanu would unfold in a way Dalton could not have imagined. The memories that shaped him, the engines of the plane hummed steadily now, but the cabin still carried the memory of turbulence. Passengers leaned back in relief, some laughing nervously, others still shaken. The fear had passed, but its echo lingered. Keanu sat quietly, his gaze on the clouds outside the window. The soft white waves drifted endlessly beneath the wings, a reminder of how small and fragile life really was. Beside him, Dalton shifted in his seat, his pride still cracked by fear. He kept glancing at Keanu, the man he had mocked, the man who had remained calm while he himself panicked. How do you do that? Dalton asked finally, his voice low, almost ashamed. How do you stay so calm when everything feels like it's falling apart? Keanu turned to him, his eyes gentle but steady. Because I've lived through storms far worse than this one. Flashbacks of hardship, his mind drifted back to moments most people never knew. He remembered being a teenager, moving from place to place, never truly having a stable home. He remembered nights of loneliness when silence was his only companion. He remembered losing people he loved, friends, family, and how grief had carved deep lines in his heart. And he remembered the quiet struggles even after fame. Riding the subway like anyone else, sitting alone in restaurants with no one to talk to, facing moments of sadness that no amount of wealth could erase. These memories did not harden him. Instead, they softened him. They taught him patience, empathy, and the truth that everyone carried battles unseen. Sharing wisdom. Storms pass, Keanu said softly, returning to the present. Fear makes them feel longer. Calm makes them easier to survive. Dalton lowered his eyes, his hands twisted together, restless. I've spent my life thinking the opposite, he admitted. That only pride and power could keep me above everyone else. But today, I felt smaller than I ever have. Keanu gave a faint smile. Sometimes feeling small reminds us how big the world truly is. It humbles us, and humility can save us in ways pride never can. Dalton looked at him, his throat tight. The words struck him deeper than any argument because they came without judgment, without anger, and only truth. Kindness across the cabine as the flight continued. Keanu's calmness began to ripple outward. He helped an elderly woman adjust her blanket, making sure she was warm. He shared a kind word with a nervous young man traveling alone, telling him stories of how he too once felt out of place in crowded rooms. He smiled at the child he had reassured earlier, playing peekaboo with her across the aisle until she laughed. Every small act was quiet, almost invisible, yet it carried weight. Passengers who had been strangers now felt connected by the thread of his kindness. Dalton watched it all, his chest heavy. For years he had measured worth in numbers, in deals, in applause. But here, in the simple acts of one man, he saw a strength no empire could buy. The unspoken apology as the flight neared its end. Dalton cleared his throat. I was wrong, he said finally, his voice rough. Keanu looked at him, not surprised, not demanding. Wrong about what? About you. About everything. I mocked you. I treated you like you didn't belong here. But when fear came, it was you who stood strong. Not me. Not the man with money, but the man with calm. He hesitated, then whispered, I'm sorry. Keanu nodded gently. Don't be sorry to me. Learn from it. Be different with the next person you meet. That will mean more than an apology ever could. Dalton felt his chest tighten, his eyes stinging. For the first time in years, he felt something he had forgotten. Humility. Preparing for landing. The captain's voice soon filled the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing for descent into Los Angeles. Please fasten your seatbelts and prepare for landing. Passengers adjusted their seats, attendants moved through the aisle, and the soft rumble of the engines deepened as the plane began its slow fall through the clouds. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply as if savoring the stillness. Dalton, however, couldn't take his eyes off him. He knew this moment would stay with him forever. But he didn't yet know that the truth of who Keanu really was would be revealed once they landed, and that truth would humble him even more. The lesson left behind the plane touched down in Los Angeles with a soft thud. Passengers clapped, some in relief, some out of habit. But for many, the applause carried something more. It was as if they were celebrating not only the landing, but the quiet presence of a man who had guided them through invisible fear. Keanu rose slowly, reaching for his simple black bag. He moved without hurry, letting others go ahead. Dalton stayed seated, his heart heavy with thoughts he couldn't shake. Truth on the ground as the passengers disembarked, Dalton noticed something unusual. Several of the flight attendants, instead of rushing to clean the cabin, paused to thank Keanu personally. Thank you for calming the passengers, one said softly. You always make things easier for us, another added. Dalton blinked. Always? He wondered. Then, as they stepped into the terminal, a small crowd formed. Some people recognized Keanu immediately. Whispers filled the air. It's him. It's Keanu Reeves. Phones came out not in a frenzy, but in quiet awe. People didn't scream his name or push forward. They simply smiled, waved, and some nodded in respect. Dalton's throat tightened. He had spent his life craving this kind of recognition, yet he realized now that Keanu had earned it not through arrogance, but through humility. The mirror of memory later that week back in New York. Daniel, the young waiter who had mocked Keanu in the restaurant, sat alone in his small apartment. The memory of that night haunted him. He replayed every word he had spoken, every smirk, every insult. Shame pressed on his chest. But more than shame, something else grew inside him, the memory of Keanu's response. Not anger, not revenge, only patience. Daniel had expected punishment, but instead he received wisdom. You don't need to know who someone is to treat them with respect. The words echoed in his mind like a bell he couldn't silence. The next morning, Daniel resigned from the Golden Vine. He joined a community kitchen downtown, serving meals to the homeless. At first, it was just an act of guilt, but over time, it became his purpose. Every smile he gave, every meal he served, reminded him of the man who had shown him true strength without ever raising his voice. Dalton's transformation back in Los Angeles. Dalton sat in his office high above the city. Skyscrapers stretched around him, symbols of the empire he had built. But for the first time, the view felt empty. He remembered Keanu's words. Power without kindness is like a storm without rain. They haunted him. He began to change, quietly at first. He treated his employees with more respect. He donated to causes he once ignored. He even visited schools not to boast about success, but to remind young people that arrogance was not strength. Whenever someone asked why he had changed, he never gave the full story. He only said, "I once met a man on a flight who showed me what real power looks like." The threads connect months later, by pure chance. Dalton and Daniel crossed paths at a charity event. Daniel was volunteering, handing out food to children. Dalton was there as a sponsor, funding a new program. They spoke, shared their stories, and realized they had both been touched by the same man. Different places, different humiliations, but the same lesson. He never shouted, Daniel said quietly. He never needed to, Dalton replied. They stood in silence for a moment. Two men who had once mocked kindness, now living proof of its power. The man who walked away, as for Keanu, he never knew the full depth of their transformation. He didn't seek credit, didn't search for applause. He simply continued living as he always had, quietly, humbly, with kindness in every step. Sometimes he was recognized on the subway. Sometimes he was spotted sharing food with strangers. Sometimes he was seen helping a crew member on a film set. Each time, the story spread. But Keanu himself slipped back into the shadows, never asking for attention. Because for him, the point was never recognition. It was the simple truth that the world was hard enough already. And one act of humility could soften it for someone. The closing message, the Golden Vine restaurant, still stands, its lights glowing warmly in the heart of New York. The staff greet every guest with the same respect, whether they wear diamonds or denim. The community kitchen where Daniel works feeds hundreds every week. And Dalton, the once proud tycoon, now funds projects that help those who cannot repay him. All of it, in some way, traces back to the quiet man who walked into a restaurant one evening and boarded a flight the next day. His silence had spoken louder than any speech. His humility had left marks deeper than pride ever could. And though he never stayed long in one place, the lessons he left behind remained. Proof that true greatness is not in owning the world, but in touching it with kindness.